Today we have some of the most overpowered vehicles that everyone must get within World of Tanks console, so hopefully it will be an interesting one to showcase some of the most overpowered, some of the strongest vehicles that World of Tanks console has to offer, showcasing all of the different types of vehicles. And we've got 5 ones that I've had a good think about today to really showcase off what they can actually do in the game, as well as kind of give a good comparison to some of the other tanks that you get in the tech tree lines, along with a premium tank in there as well, for if you really want to seal club in some of the more expensive tanks that are in the game that you can't buy with just silver. So with that being said, let's take a look at one of the first vehicles that we have today, which is the TVP VTU. This tier 8 medium tank from the Czech line is actually one of the best vehicles that people just completely disregard. It is a vehicle that has the ability to do 320 alpha damage. Compare that with its really amazing DPM of 2.3 thousand as a tier 8 medium. It puts it up there with genuinely some of the best tanks in the game, and we haven't even got a commander in it. So as soon as we put a commander in here, you'll see that the DPM of this vehicle goes up to 2,700. For example, a tier 6 vehicle like a tank destroyer would have just slightly lower than this one, something like a Hellcat 105. So having a tier 8 vehicle this good with that much DPM is actually really nice. And consider the fact that this tank actually has quite a bit of armor as well. You've got this pretty decent flat plates on the front that can essentially be so thick that most people will bounce off of you. You can see here a 75mm kind of armor plate that at tier 6 people will be able to bounce off of you. So as a tier 8 vehicle, it should be pretty decent as well. So with all of this in mind, and with 320 damage, with the ability to fire premium rounds with 246 pen, so when you are in those tier 10 games, it makes it just that little bit harder for you to actually do anything. And when you've got the accuracy that this tank has of 0.29 with all of the accuracy perks bar a gun stabilizer, yeah, it really makes it work quite well. And with 8 degrees of gun depression, you're quite flexible with this vehicle too. 50 kilometers an hour top speed makes this tank actually pretty decent and fast. And yeah, when you combine all of these things together, it is genuinely one of the best medium tanks at tier 8 that you can purchase. It rivals the likes of things such as the Centurion 1, which is the British medium tank. This one being slightly better as it's bigger and you're able to kind of get over ridge lines and shoot people just that little bit more flexibly, even if it doesn't have as good gun depression and as if it doesn't have as good of a gun as well. So with that being said, that's the TVP VTU. Definitely worthwhile actually getting, and unfortunately the tier 9 and tier 10 vehicles in this tech tree line are significantly worse, and you'll be really hating actually trying out these tanks when you do finally get them, as they get this weird autoloader mechanic, which in World of Tanks is just one of the worst mechanics possible when you do actually get it. And of course you see most of the underpowered vehicles having autoloaders, so yeah, the TVP T5051 as the top tier of this line, yeah, really does suck tons. So with that being said, even if the top tiers are good, you should definitely try out the TVP VTU. And of course you get a flamethrower, as if having the overpowered stats weren't enough, giving it a flamethrower. Wargaming really did make this tank super strong in the game. Next up on this list is actually, once again, one of those vehicles that you probably rarely see, and you definitely do not see it loaded up like this. This is the AMX M4 MLE51, which is a tier 9 heavy tank that really is quite good, and there's a reason why this version of the vehicle is actually better than the fully upgraded version. Yeah, I'm telling you that this version of the tank, because of the turret, makes it super strong. This is of course the French heavy, and this one leads on to of course the AMX M4 MLE54 at tier 10, and the problem with the upgraded version of the turret is that it kind of gets this essentially a flatter profile turret, whereby you see it similar to what you see with the AMX M4 here. It kind of turns into this, whereas what you really want is a flatter turret that is basically the exact same as the tier 8 below, because you're so used to playing in the lower tier tank that has pretty strong armor. I mean, look at the frontal plates of this armor, very much red. You can see it has 250mm of armor on the front of the turret, which is amazing. And of course, when you then add in that the cupola has almost 200mm, which at tier 9, I mean, no one really has enough pen to reliably go through that. And of course, they have to hit such a tiny little area to actually pen, so it makes the turret actually very, very strong. Whereas when you go for something like this sort of turret, you get this giant cupola at the back of the vehicle alongside these really kind of weird angled and kind of rounded corners of the front of the vehicle that you get with the Lorraine AMX M4. And you can see there, whatever angle you're looking at, you can pen this thing, whereas the AMX M451, because it's flatter and because it's basically always going to have its front of the turret towards the opponents, it makes it way more effective, and you're going to bounce tons of rounds off of the turret of this vehicle. Combine that with the fact that this main armament with the 120mm rather than the 127 has a consistent 400 alpha damage, which you can kick out really, really nicely. You can see here without a commander in it, which I guess we should probably put a commander in so you see the true reflection of the stats, but it gets around about 2,500 DPM. If we just slot in a random commander here, you should be able to see up to 2,476 DPM, and a tier 9 heavy puts that up there with some of the highest tanks DPMs at tier 9, which is why I really love this tank. It really does feel amazing, and when you combine that with a 40 km/h top speed, a 8 degrees of gun depression, that amazing turret, and with very, very good accuracy, a 0.29 accuracy with a gun stabilizer in there as well, and of course the penetration values that you get, 257 on this, makes it very, very solid to go through a lot of tanks. And with 300 as your, well, 315 if we're going to be precise, on your premium round. So if you're loading premium rounds, it's basically an instant pen through every single tank. And what you want to gonna be basically able to do with this tank when you are firing those premium rounds is just auto aiming at absolutely everything, and you're going to do way, way better. Genuinely, what you'll find is that the 315 pen will go through absolutely everything, and there's no real need to actually fire when you're fully aimed by looking in the scope. And so that's really what you're going to want to do. And of course then, if you are loading the standard, you will want to actually aim in, because you may bounce. Of course, when you're using 315, it would have been RNG or maybe some other luck factor that the other person has if you are firing on the move when auto aiming with premium. If you are not actually able to pen, or if you do end up missing, it's just going to be RNG. It's got nothing to do with auto aiming on the move at 40 km/h in a heavy tank. There's nothing, it isn't that, trust me. This tank is amazing. It's going to be able to do it every single time of the week, and for the most part I never really like fully upgrading my vehicles, because I like just being slightly different and having nuanced parts where people will see this and be like, oh, it's a tier 8, but actually this is the tier 9, and it has the same stats as the tier 8 when you first have the tank. So why not continue that on until you reach tier 10 basically? And rather than fully upgrading, that's kind of what I do on most of my tanks, because it's the smarter thing to do. Rather than spending the silver on upgrading your vehicle, I'd rather spend it on premium rounds that have that automatic capability to auto aim with this tank. So another great addition to World of Tanks console, and hopefully you guys will test it out. Let me know in the comment section down below whether you've actually tried this setup, this stock version of the AMX M451, because it really does feel super, super nice, and certainly isn't a grind when you're actually playing it. Now at tier 10 there are a ton of vehicles that we could even pick from, and it really took me a long time to come up with my top vehicle for this section of the video, where we look at the tier 10. Which tank do you, should you, or everyone actually have as a tier 10 in the game? Maybe the first tier 10 that they actually go towards. Well, hopefully this is going to answer it. This is, after much deliberation, the AMX 30B. There is no other tank even remotely similar to what you would see with the AMX 30B. There is no tank that would be even remotely similar to the AMX 30B. It would definitely not be anything better than the AMX 30B. And of course, this is the oh no, sorry, that's the Leopard 1. The 30B, this is the actual tank that has basically everything that you want, and nothing can really compare to it, not even the Leopard 1. And that's because this tank has a whopping 3000 DPM, which for a medium tank at tier 10 is not bad. And of course, if we put in the commander that we had on the AMX in here, just to showcase the upward limit of this tank, 3,600 DPM with 0.26 accuracy. It's a laser that deals a ton of damage over the entire minute. It has 8 degrees of gun depression, so at least it keeps up with the 10 degrees of all of the other medium tanks. Its armor also keeps up with a lot of the heavily armored vehicles. You can see here on the mantlet of the tank, it's 300 millimeters, so the entire turret is 300 millimeters with this vehicle, and so no one pens you. Genuinely, the turret of this tank, unpennable. And then you combine that with quite a small cupola. In all fairness, has 100 millimeters of thickness on the front of the cupola, which the angles that you're showing here, basically it's an auto bounce. So although it shows as a cupola, it's not really a cupola, so you should never aim for this thing if you see it cropping over a ridgeline. Similarly, the front of the hull armor, you can see here the lower plate and the upper lower plate, if you get what I mean. You can see we've got 55 millimeters and 50 millimeters of armor, but because it is angled so well, so you can see here the angle of it, that is crazy angle, which means the effective armor on this lower plate is 493 millimeters of armor on this lower plate. So you don't go for the lower plate at all. And similarly on the upper plate, because of this angle with the 55 millimeter plate, essentially you cannot pen this thing. It just doesn't happen. You want to be going for essentially the front of the turret. That's the only frontal weak point of the AMX 30B, and you really want to go for it. So the armor of this tank makes it incredibly exceptional as a tier 10 tank, and realistically the entire grind leading up to it, there are none like it, including the AMX 30. And of course, in order to get to the AMX 30, you've got to play the Batchet 12T, which unfortunately is not a great vehicle. Neither the AMX 1375 or the AMX 12T. These are all very awful vehicles. And then you get to the AMX 30 and the AMX 30B, and it makes it entirely worth it, your time. So make sure that you do accept that the Batchet 12T is a terrible vehicle, and then of course move on to the AMX 30 and the 30B with a ton more pleasure, making the entire tech tree line worth grinding out in the first place. So the AMX 30B definitely up there with one of the best tanks, and certainly no other vehicles are even remotely better whatsoever, and there would definitely not be a better alternative to actually try out in the game. Next up on this list is what you would assume to be the IS, but actually no. At tier 7, the best vehicle that I've ever played is in fact the IS2. There's a reason why it's called the IS2. It's because it's 2 times better than the IS, and it will genuinely knock your socks off. Not only is it slightly faster than what you'll see with the standard IS, you can see here the standard IS has 34 kilometers an hour versus the 37 kilometers an hour that you have with the IS2, and that makes it just a huge world of difference. It also gets more hit points. You can see up to 1280 hit points. The penetration values on the IS2 are 250 millimeters with the premium rounds, making this feel absolutely incredible. The DPM up to 2,675 as opposed to the 2,250, and that's even because we've got no commander in. So if we put a commander in, you'll see that they are basically, there is no point in actually trying out the IS standard version. This tank is god awful, and the IS2 is just going to be your better variant. You can see they have the exact same damage per minute, but of course, why would you want the exact same when you can just be faster and have more hit points? That is literally the only thing you need with these vehicles. You can see here 0.36 accuracy, it's the exact same. The IS2 has 5 degrees of gun depression, the IS gets 6 degrees of gun depression. So I'd rather have the lower value because at least it shows that you're more skillful as opposed to having to rely on being able to hit over ridge lines and being flexible in the game. The view range of the IS is actually pretty good at 458 meters, and of course these exact same on the IS2. So realistically, this tank is just better than the IS. There is nothing potentially better about the IS other than the gun depression, and so when you combine all of that together, and given that I've 4-marked the IS, I definitely know what I'm on about when it comes to showcasing off this Chinese heavy tank at tier 7. So yeah, the IS2 is 100% the best tier 7 that you can actually get in the game, And I think as a free vehicle, you don't have to purchase it. You don't have to spend your money. This is the tank to go for as your first tier 7, and especially as your first tier 7 heavy tank. So make sure that you do pick this one up, as I'm sure you're going to be guaranteeing that you'll have a ton of fun. And then of course, as the premium tank for today, the best premium tank that you could ever purchase within the game, it's the Tog II. And there's one reason for that. Look at how many hit points this tier 6 heavy tank has. 1650 hit points puts it up there with the best heavy tank at this tier. And in fact, even if you look at similar vehicles, it has 1.6 times as many hit points as the A43 Black Prince prototype, which is insane. Literally 1.6 times more hit points than the other premium tanks. And even if you look at some of the other vehicles in the game, they all have around 1,000 hit points. The Tog II smashing it out of the water today, really showcasing what this tank's upward limit of how many hit points you can have in the game. It's better than some tier 8 heavy tanks. You can see things like the Tigers having less hit points than this. And of course, when you have a tier 6 with this many hit points, where you're fighting people that are only dealing 150 damage, it takes them so long to take you out of the game. And when you combine this with incredible armor, and I mean, if you've seen this thing in the tank museum, if you've gone to Bovington yourself, you'll just know how strong this thing looks and how gigantic it is. And of course, being that it is so big, of course the armor is going to be best. There's no point even looking at the actual armor statistics in this viewer. 76mm, that is enough to bounce everything that you'll meet. I mean, 76mm, you know, you're looking at tier 4 vehicles, they are just bouncing everything off of you. And when you are smacking them for 150 damage with the incredible DPM, 2,129 DPM without a commander, this tank is unbelievable. And I mean, yes, the DPM on this tank might be incredible, but you compare that to a lot of the other heavy tanks, things like the A43 Black Prince, it's significantly lower, even though even if you were to put a commander in the A43, the Tog II just blows it out the water. And similarly, you're going to have more DPM than what you see with a lot of the tier 6 tank destroyers, a lot of the tier 6 medium tanks. You'll have more DPM than them, and of course you'll have more hit points to outtrade them. So it just becomes a case that you can dominate any tank one-on-one, and that really is a big thing for playing World of Tanks console, which makes this one of the best premium tanks, if not the best premium tank that you can get. And when you combine it with the amazing top speed limit of 14 kilometers an hour, it really does feel like you can mobilize all around the map. You can go from left flank to right flank, back to left flank, and you'll have mopped up the entire game in the process, dealing so much damage that people have no real chance to actually take you out. And yeah, you can just run rings around the opponents, and of course artillery will struggle to hit you. Although being a large target, because of the speed limit of 140 kilometers an hour, basically they're never going to hit you. It's just a case of just absolute annihilation. And so why the Tog II is just as good as it is. You're going to want advanced loader, improved ventilation, and advanced optics to boost up your DPM, your view range, as well as your view range again with optics, and of course your DPM again, track repair speed, that sort of thing with improved ventilation. And it might only be small increases, but it is going to make a massive difference to this tank, and you'll feel super dominant. And what's even better is that you have the ability to put on this camo, and any tank that has a camo, if you've seen and you know, and you are one of the knowers in the chat, make sure that you leave in the comment section down below that skin equals better RNG. Skin equals better RNG on this game. I have played thousands and 20,000, 25,000 plus games, and every single game that I see someone with a skin on, they do better than someone without a skin. It is 100% guaranteed. If you get yourself a skin, which the Tog actually has the option to do, you're going to be even better. And so that really makes a massive world of difference as well. And of course, there is nothing at all to remotely even compare to the Tog itself. And hopefully this video has shown you 5 really amazing vehicles that I think everyone should have in the game. And if you haven't already, you should definitely try out the Tog II tanks. And if you have a little bit of money to spend and you want to purchase a premium tank, the Tog II is love. The Tog II is life, and this video was definitely not a joke to watch. You really do need to get these tanks, and I will see you in the next one. If you want to watch some gameplay and tank reviews that aren't like this one and actually showcase some of the tanks, then be sure to look at these ones on screen. And of course, I'll be interested to see your comments in the comment section down below as to what you thought of these 5 vehicles. Goodbye.